Give the house to Fiona, you were never supposed to have it anyway. My mother said that to me while I was standing in my grandmother's kitchen, still wearing the black dress from the funeral. The coffee in my hand was going cold. I hadn't slept in 2 days, and the woman who raised me looked me in the eye and said I was never supposed to have anything. I'm a paralegal. I've spent 8 years watching people tear each other apart over money. I've filed the paperwork. I've sat across from families who walked into a law office as relatives and walked out as strangers. I always thought I understood it academically. Greed, entitlement, the way a death certificate can turn people into something unrecognizable. I had no idea. My grandmother's name was Ruth. She was 81 years old, sharp until the very end. The kind of woman who kept a budget notebook in her kitchen drawer and remembered every birthday without a phone reminder. She raised me for 3 years, when I was 8, after my parents' marriage fell apart the first time. She taught me to make pie crust from scratch. She called me every Sunday at 7 in the evening for 23 years without missing once. When she passed in February, quietly in her sleep, in the house where she had lived for 44 years, I was the one who drove 3 hours to be there. My mother arrived the next morning. My younger sister Fiona arrived the afternoon after that, rolling her suitcase through the front door like she was checking into a hotel. I should explain something about Fiona. Fiona is 31. She is charming in the way that certain people are charming. Effortlessly, selectively, in ways that tend to benefit her specifically. Growing up, she was the one who cried at the right moment, who knew how to make our parents feel guilty enough to reverse a decision. She never held a job longer than 14 months. She'd been living with her parents, on and off, since she was 26. My grandmother loved her. Fiona would come by with flowers, sit at the kitchen table, let Grandma Ruth talk. I always believed that was genuine. Maybe it was, in its way. But love and agenda are not mutually exclusive, and I know that now in a way I didn't before February. The will was straightforward. Grandma Ruth had worked with an estate attorney named Mr. Calloway 2 years prior. The house, a 3-bedroom in a quiet suburb of Columbus, Ohio, assessed at just over $300,000, went to me. The contents, the savings account, a small collection of jewelry, split evenly between me and Fiona. It was clear. It was witnessed. It was notarized. I found out about it the same afternoon I found the document in the fireproof lockbox she kept under her bed, exactly where she told me it would be 4 years ago, when she sat me down and said she wanted me to know where things were. She hadn't told Fiona. I don't know if she told my mother. I called Mr. Calloway that evening to confirm. He remembered Grandma Ruth well. He said the will was valid and on file with his office. He said he was sorry for my loss. I thanked him and sat on the edge of her bed for a long time. I should have left the next morning. Instead, I stayed to help with arrangements. That felt right. That felt like what she would have wanted. Somebody making sure the details were handled, the neighbors notified, the obituary submitted to the paper. My mother had never been good with logistics. Fiona certainly wasn't going to do it. That first evening, the 3 of us sat in the living room together. My mother was subdued in that particular way she gets quiet, watching, the way a cat watches something before it moves. Fiona was on her phone. I made dinner because nobody else was going to. It was over dishes that my mother said it, not loud, not dramatic, just a statement like she was reading from a list. Fiona needs stability right now. The house should go to her. I turned off the faucet. I dried my hands. I said, that's not what Grandma Ruth wanted. My mother looked at me for a long moment. Your grandmother wasn't thinking clearly at the end. She hadn't seen Fiona in months. If she had, she would have made different choices. She saw Fiona at Christmas. She seemed fine. You don't know everything. That was the beginning. Over the next 3 days, the conversation happened in variations. At breakfast. In the hallway. Once, quietly, when Fiona was in the shower and my mother sat across from me at the kitchen table and told me that I had a good job, a stable life, a husband who made decent money, and that it was selfish of me to hold on to something I didn't need when my sister was struggling. I want to be clear, I never yelled. I never threatened, I said calmly each time that I intended to honor my grandmother's wishes. What I didn't say was what I was actually doing. Because I'm a paralegal, I know how these things go sideways. I know what a contested will looks like. I know what documentation matters. And I know that the period immediately following a death is when the most damage gets done. Quietly, privately, before anyone thinks to protect themselves. So I photographed the will. I emailed the photos to my personal account and to my husband Kevin, who was back home with our dog waiting for me to return. I called Mr. Calloway again and asked him to confirm in writing, via email, that the document was valid and on file. I wrote down every conversation my mother had with me, date and time and exact wording, in the notes app on my phone. I did it without announcing it. I did it like it was nothing. On the third night, something shifted. Fiona came to find me in the guest room where I was sleeping. She sat on the edge of the bed and she looked different. Not the polished, performing Fiona. Something behind her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. She said, "I didn't ask for this." I said, "I know." She said, "Mom has been on the phone with someone. A lawyer, I think. I heard her say undue influence. I don't know what she's planning, but I thought you should know." I looked at my sister for a moment. I said, "Why are you telling me this?" She looked at the window. "Because Grandma Ruth loved you. And I don't want to be part of whatever this is becoming." I nodded. I said, "Okay." She left. I sat in the dark for a while, and then I picked up my phone and called Kevin. "Come get me tomorrow," I said. "What happened?" "Nothing yet, but I want to be gone before it does." He was there by noon. I said goodbye to my mother in the front doorway of Grandma Ruth's house. She didn't hug me. She said, "You're making a mistake." I said, "I love you, Mom." And I meant it. And I got in the car and Kevin drove us home. The certified letter arrived 11 days later. My mother had retained an attorney, a man named Doyle, based in Columbus, and was filing a challenge to the will on the grounds of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. The claim was essentially that I had manipulated my grandmother in her final years, isolated her from the family, and coerced her into changing her will in my favor. I read it twice. Then I called my own attorney, a woman named Ms. Hargrove, who I'd worked with professionally for 4 years and trusted completely. She read through the filing and was quiet for a moment. "This is thin," she said, "but thin doesn't mean harmless. Do you have documentation?" "Yes." "How much?" "A lot." She paused. "Tell me." I told her about the notes app, about the emails, about Mr. Calloway's written confirmation, about the fact that my grandmother had executed the will 2 years prior when she was attending her book club, driving herself to the grocery store, and had scored perfectly on a cognitive assessment her doctor had administered at her annual physical. I had obtained that record with her physician's office as her designated healthcare contact before I left Columbus. Miss Hargrove was quiet for another moment. "You're a paralegal." "Yes." "Okay," she said. "We're going to be fine." What followed was 4 months that I will not fully describe because they were exhausting and dull in the way that legal disputes are, not dramatic, just slow and grinding and expensive. My mother's attorney sent letters. Ms. Hargrove responded. Depositions were scheduled. Kevin was steady through all of it. He is not a particularly expressive man, but he made dinner most nights, and he sat with me when I needed to talk through it, and he never once suggested I should just let it go to keep the peace. He said, "Your grandmother trusted you. That's worth defending." He said it once early on, and he didn't need to say it again. The deposition was in June. My mother sat across a conference table from me for the first time since February. She looked older. Fiona was not there. She had declined to be involved in the litigation, which her attorney had noted in correspondence. What my mother's attorney didn't know, what I don't think my mother knew, was that Mr. Calloway had retained his own file notes from the will signing. He had written, in his standard practice notation, that Ruth had arrived alone, had reviewed the document carefully, had asked 2 clarifying questions about the division of personal property, and had signed in full capacity. He had noted, specifically, that Ruth had mentioned wanting to ensure the house went to me because, in his words as recorded, she raised that girl and she wants her to have roots. When Miss Hargrove entered that notation into evidence, my mother's attorney asked for a recess. During the recess, I sat in the hallway with a cup of coffee from the machine near the elevator. Miss Hargrove came to find me after about 20 minutes. She sat down. Their attorney approached me, she said. They want to discuss settlement. I looked at her. What kind of settlement? Withdrawal of the challenge. Full acknowledgement of the will is valid. In exchange, you agree not to pursue legal fees. I thought about it for a long time. I thought about my grandmother's handwriting on birthday cards. I thought about Sunday phone calls. I thought about pie crust. Done, I said. The challenge was formally withdrawn on a Thursday in late June. Mr. Calloway's office recorded the disposition. The house became mine, legally, cleanly, without asterisk. I drove to Columbus alone the following weekend. Kevin offered to come. I told him I needed to do it by myself. I let myself in with the spare key that had lived on my keychain for 6 years. The house smelled the same, a little like cedar, a little like the candle she kept on the mantel. The rooms were quiet. The neighbor had been collecting the mail. I sat in her kitchen for a long time. There's a window above the sink that looks out onto the backyard, and she had a bird feeder hanging from the maple tree that she had refilled every week without fail. It was empty. I found the bag of seed in the cabinet under the counter in the same place it had always been, and I went outside and filled it. I stood at the back door and watched a chickadee land on the feeder before I'd even made it back inside. I don't know exactly what I felt, something that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite peace, but was somewhere between the two, like a door closing gently instead of slamming. My mother and I have not spoken since the withdrawal. I sent her a card at Christmas because she is still my mother, and Grandma Ruth, I think, would have wanted me to. I didn't hear back. Fiona texted me in August. It just said, "I'm sorry about how everything went. I hope you're doing okay." I replied that I was, and I wished her well. We haven't talked since, but it sits differently than the silence with my mother. Less like a wound, more like a chapter that ended without resolution, but without cruelty either. I listed the house with a realtor in September. Kevin and I had talked it through. We have our life in Pittsburgh, our house, our routines. Keeping the Columbus house as a rental felt like more than we wanted to manage. Selling it felt like honoring what it was, something she gave me, to use as I needed. It went under contract in 3 weeks, closed in November. I used part of the proceeds to pay off the last of my student loans. I put the rest in savings. I sat at my own kitchen table in Pittsburgh on a Tuesday evening and looked at the number in my account and thought about a woman who kept a budget notebook in her kitchen drawer and refilled a bird feeder every single week. Some people will look at this story and see an inheritance dispute, a legal filing, a family fracture, and I understand that. From the outside, that's what it was. But from where I was sitting in that guest room in February, writing notes into my phone at midnight, trying to protect something a woman had spent her whole life building, it wasn't about the house. It was never about the house. It was about whether her wishes meant anything. Whether a person can spend 81 years making careful, considered choices about her own life and have those choices honored when she can no longer speak for herself. I think they can. I think that's worth protecting. The last thing she said to me, the October before she passed, was on one of our Sunday calls. We had been talking about nothing in particular, a book she was reading, a cold snap that had come through earlier than expected. Before she hung up, she said, "You know I'm proud of you, right? I just want to make sure you know that." I told her I knew. I'm glad I did. I keep coming back to the bird feeder. Not the legal filings, not the deposition, not the number that appeared in my account the November after everything settled. The bird feeder. The bag of seed under the cabinet, exactly where it always was. The fact that she refilled it every single week without being asked, without anyone watching, without any reward other than the chickadees that showed up because she had made it worth their while to come. That's who Grandma Ruth was. And that, I think, is why everything unfolded the way it did. When my mother filed that challenge, I think she genuinely believed she would win. She believed it because she had won before. Small things, family things, the quiet contests that happen inside households where one child is chosen and another is managed. She had spent years watching me accommodate, defer, keep the peace. She mistook that for weakness. A lot of people make that mistake. What she didn't account for was that being good and being naive are not the same thing. I had watched families tear each other apart over estates for 8 years. I understood on a practical level what needed to be documented and when. But more than that, I understood what Grandma Ruth had actually given me, and it wasn't the house. It was the model of how to move through the world with your integrity intact. You do the right thing quietly, consistently, without an audience. You keep the records. You refill the feeder. And when the moment comes that someone tries to undo what you built, you have something real to stand on. The outcomes in this story weren't random. My mother's challenge collapsed not because of luck, but because of a chain of decisions that went back years. Ruth's decision to work with a careful attorney, to document her own intentions, to trust me with the location of that lockbox. My decision to write down every conversation, to call Mr. Calloway twice, to leave before things escalated. Even Fiona's decision, quiet and small, to walk into that guest room and tell me what she'd overheard. Every one of those choices created a consequence. The ones made with care held. The ones made from greed didn't. I think about that when I hear people say that doing the right thing doesn't get you anywhere. It does. It just doesn't always get you there on the timeline you wanted or in the way you expected, and it requires you to keep showing up even when the outcome isn't guaranteed yet. There's a version of this story where I fold, where I decide the fight isn't worth it, that preserving some surface-level family harmony matters more than honoring what my grandmother actually wanted. I understood that option. There were nights I sat with it, but I kept thinking about her voice on those Sunday calls. Steady, warm, always on time. The kind of consistency that only comes from a person who has decided, somewhere along the way, that their word means something, that what they build is worth protecting. That love isn't just a feeling, it's a practice, and it shows up in the details. She showed me that. The least I could do was prove I'd been paying attention. I still have the bird feeder. It's hanging from a shepherd's hook in our backyard in Pittsburgh now. Kevin put it up the weekend after we got home from that last trip to Columbus. I fill it every week.